"I never asked for love," she said. Mafia boss smiled as he paid off her debts in secret. The 5 o'clock steam from the dishwasher hit Cassie Moreno in the face like a wave of wet heat, fogging her glasses and scalding the weariness deeper into her bones. This was the start of her second shift, the 14th hour of her day, and the Galaxy Diner was just gearing up for the dinner rush. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, frying onions, and the lemon-scented ammonia Marge used to wipe down the vinyl counters. Cassie moved through it all like a ghost, her white uniform immaculate, but her eyes hollow. She was a creature of practiced, economical movements. No wasted steps between the kitchen pass and the booths, no excess energy spent on smiling. She refilled sugar caddies, balanced plates on her thin arms, and kept her gaze fixed just above the customers' heads. The exhaustion was a physical weight, a constant ache that started in her feet and settled in her lower back. But it was nothing compared to the cold, tight knot of panic that lived permanently in her chest. This entire performance, this grueling 17-hour marathon of serving burnt coffee and gray meatloaf, was for Max. Her brother was 13, going on 60, with kidneys that were failing faster than she could run. 3 days a week, the dialysis machine did the work his body could not, and every single treatment was a bill she could not pay. "You look like death warmed over, honey," Marge said, sliding a cup of coffee toward her at the server station. Marge was a lifer, with a brassy voice and a nest of blonde hair that defied gravity. "You need to rest. Let me cover the rest of your tables." Cassie forced a tight smile, pushing her glasses back up her nose. "I'm fine, Marge. Just tired. Big night." "Big night?" Marge scoffed, tapping her order pad. "It's Tuesday. You've been saying that every night for 2 months. You're stretched so thin you're about to snap. If you need a little float." "No." The word was sharper than Cassie intended. She softened it. "I'm okay, really. Max just needs some new textbooks." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. The stress was leaking out of her. It showed in the tremor of her hands as she poured coffee, in the new, purplish bruise that circled her left wrist, mostly hidden by her sleeve. She'd told Marge she'd slammed it in a car door. The truth was far uglier. The truth had a name, Ray. The phone in her apron vibrated. A new text message. She didn't need to look. Money. Cassie. Now. Her ex-boyfriend, a 2-bit enforcer with delusions of grandeur. Ray had inherited her father's gambling debts like they were a family heirloom. $25,000. An astronomical sum that might as well have been $1 million. Her father, bless his soul, had managed to drink and bet himself into an early grave, leaving her and Max to clean up the mess. Ray, who had once bought her flowers, was now the man who collected. He was the one who had given her the bruise, grabbing her in the hallway of her apartment building 2 nights ago, his fingers digging into her wrist as he reminded her of the interest. "The clock is ticking, baby," he'd whispered, his breath hot and smelling of cheap whiskey. "And my bosses, they ain't as patient as me." Cassie deleted the text without reading the rest and shoved the phone back into her apron. She scanned the diner. Booth 4 was empty. He was usually here by now. For the past 3 weeks, there was another man who watched her. He was the opposite of Ray in every conceivable way, where Ray was loud, cheap, and reeked of desperation. This man was silent. He sat in the back booth, always facing the door, and nursed a single black coffee for exactly 1 hour. He wore suits that cost more than her apartment's rent. They were dark, perfectly tailored, and looked absurd in the greasy spoon setting of the Galaxy Diner. He was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light. He never read the paper. He never used his phone. He just watched. He watched the room. He watched the door. And most of all, he watched her. It wasn't a leer. It wasn't the way other men looked at her, either sizing her up or dismissing her entirely. It was analytical, heavy, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. He saw the tremor in her hands. He saw the exhaustion. He had seen the bruise 2 days ago, his eyes flicking to it for just a second. Cassie found his presence unnerving. He was a piece that didn't fit, a wolf that had wandered into a sheep pen. Tonight. He was late. She felt a strange, unwelcome flicker of disappointment, which immediately soured into self-loathing. She didn't need another man watching her. She was clearing plates when the bell above the door chimed. He walked in, nodding once to Marge, and slid into his usual booth, Luca Moretti. She only knew his name because Marge had once tried to flirt with him, and he had shut her down with a look so cold it had frozen her mid-sentence. Cassie picked up the coffee pot and headed over. "Just black," she said, her voice flat. He looked up. His gaze was intense, unblinking. "You spilled some." She glanced down. Her hand was shaking, just slightly. From the lingering anger of Ray's text, a few drops of coffee had splashed onto the saucer. "Sorry." She started to wipe it. "You're working too hard," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air. Cassie's defenses snapped up. "Gotta pay the bills." She put the pot down and began to walk away. "Whose bills?" She stopped. She turned back slowly. He was looking at her sleeve, right where it covered the bruise. He hadn't seen the text. He couldn't know about Ray. It was just a guess, a lucky, invasive guess. "My own," she said, the words sharp as broken glass. "Is there anything else I can get you?" He held her gaze. She felt stripped bare, like he could see every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every desperate prayer. There was no smile, no pity, just observation. "No," he said, finally. "That's all." She retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering. She hated him. She hated his quiet judgment, his expensive suit, his easy assumption that her life was something to be diagnosed over a $2 cup of coffee. An hour later, the diner was chaos. A busload of high school kids on a field trip had descended, demanding burgers and milkshakes, and Marge was in the back arguing with the cook. Cassie was running, trying to take orders, deliver food, and clear tables all at once. The bell chimed again, and her blood ran cold. Ray, he was here. He was standing just inside the doorway, scanning the room, a smirk on his face. He was wearing a cheap leather jacket and too much cologne, a cloud of it rolling in with him. "Cassie," he boomed, making every customer turn. "There's my girl. Forgot to text me back." Cassie froze. A tray of milkshakes balanced on her arm. "Ray, you can't be here. I'm working." "Oh, I know you're working. You're always working, but you're not paying." He sauntered over, his eyes greasy. "We need to talk. Outside." "I can't. I'm not asking." He reached for her, his hand clamping down on her arm, right on the sore spot. Cassie flinched, a sharp cry escaping her lips. The tray wobbled. "Get off me, Ray!" The diner went silent. The sizzle of the grill was the only sound. From the back booth, Luca Moretti watched. He hadn't moved. His face was granite. He watched Ray manhandle her, watched the fear and humiliation warring on her face, and he did nothing. He just sat there, a shadow in the corner, lifting his coffee cup to his lips. Cassie saw him watching. She saw the lack of reaction. It was a special kind of humiliation, to be assaulted in a room full of people who just looked away. Marge burst out of the kitchen. "Hey, you! Get your hands off her! I'm calling the cops!" Ray laughed, a short, ugly sound. He shoved Cassie backward hard. She stumbled, and the tray of milkshakes went flying, crashing onto the floor in a spray of glass and vanilla ice cream. "She knows the rules," Ray sneered at Marge. He pointed a finger at Cassie. 10 o'clock, my car. You be there." He turned and walked out, the bell chiming his exit. The diner slowly came back to life, the whispers starting up. Cassie was shaking, staring at the mess on the floor. "Honey, are you—" Marge started. "I'm fine," Cassie whispered, grabbing a rag. "I'll clean it up." She didn't look at the back booth. She couldn't. A few minutes later, she heard the scrape of the chair. She saw, in her peripheral vision, the man in the dark suit walk past her. He dropped a $20 bill on the table for his $2 coffee and walked out the door, not giving her a second glance. Outside. The air was cold. Ray was humming, walking toward his beat-up sedan, feeling proud of himself. He'd put the fear in her. That was how you managed women. A voice, quiet and cold, cut through the night. That was a mistake. Ray turned. The guy from the diner, the suit, was standing in the mouth of the alley, cloaked in shadow. The hell are you? Ray scoffed, pulling his jacket straight. Her new boyfriend. The man stepped forward into the yellow light of the street lamp. Luca Moretti. Ray's stomach dropped. He didn't know the man personally, but he knew the face. Everyone in their line of work knew the Moretti family. They were the real thing, the old school. This wasn't some street-level punk. This was a boss. Mr. Moretti, Ray stammered, his bravado evaporating. I didn't know she was with you. I swear, it's just a debt, a family thing. You don't touch her, Luca said. His voice was still quiet, but it had the flat, hard finality of a closing steel door. No, of course not. I was just... You don't come to her work, Luca continued, taking another slow step. You don't put your hands on her. You don't speak her name. You don't even look in her direction. Am I clear? Crystal, Ray squeaked, holding his hands up. Absolutely. The debt's forgotten. A misunderstanding. No, Luca said. The debt is the debt, but it's not yours to collect anymore. It's mine. Now get out of my sight. Ray scrambled into his car and peeled out, running a red light. Luca stood in the empty street for a moment. A black town car, silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb. His right-hand man, Nico, leaned over from the driver's seat. Boss, Nico said, his voice gravelly. That was sloppy. Getting your hands dirty for that gutter trash? Luca got into the back seat, the door closing with a heavy, expensive thud. He was loud? She's a civilian, Luca, Nico argued, pulling smoothly into traffic. A waitress. It's not our business. It brings heat. You know the rules. It is now, Luca said, staring out the window at the diner. He could see Cassie inside, on her hands and knees, cleaning up the mess. Find out what that scumbag held over her. I want to know everything. Nico sighed. And the girl? Leave her. I want to see what she does next. What Cassie did next was survive. She finished her shift, her body screaming, her mind numb. She got home just before midnight. The apartment was dark and quiet. Max, she whispered, pushing open his door. He was asleep, a thin, frail shape under the blankets. His breathing was shallow. She checked his monitors. Everything seemed stable. She went to her own room, a tiny space partitioned off from the living room. She was pulling off her uniform when her purse fell from the hook. It felt heavier than it should. She opened it. Tucked into the side pocket, where she kept her tips, was a plain white envelope. Her heart stopped. She didn't remember putting it there. She tore it open. Inside was a thick wad of cash, hundreds. She counted it, her hands shaking so badly she kept losing her place. $5,000. Her first thought was not relief. It was pure, unadulterated terror. This was a test. It had to be Ray. He was testing her. Or maybe it was a down payment on something horrible, something he expected her to do. It was dirty money. It was a trap. She felt sick. She grabbed the envelope, shoved her feet back into her sneakers, and ran. She ran the 6 blocks back to the diner, her breath catching in her throat. Marge was just locking up. Cassie, what's wrong? You forget something. This? Cassie panted, shoving the envelope into Marge's hand. This was in my purse. I think... Or in the locker room. I don't know. Someone left it. It's not mine. Marge opened it. Her eyes went wide. Cassie, this is... Put it in the lost and found, as Cassie said, her voice frantic. If someone wants it, they have to describe it. I didn't see it. I don't want it. Please, Marge, just put it away. Marge looked from the money to Cassie's terrified face. All right, honey, all right. I'll put it in the safe. You go home. Get some sleep. Cassie nodded, turned, and walked home, empty-handed and more exhausted than ever, from a black town car parked in the shadows across the street. Luca watched her go. He had told Nico to handle it, but he had come himself. He had slipped the envelope into her bag while she was cleaning the spill, a simple test, a way to help without her pride getting in the way. He had watched her find it, and he had just watched her return it. She gave it back, Nico said, stunned. Luca said nothing. His expression was unreadable. This woman, who was drowning in debt, who was being terrorized by thugs, who was working herself into the grave, had just returned $5,000. He was no longer intrigued. He was fascinated. He was still thinking about it when his phone buzzed. A text from Nico. Problem. The kid. The phone rang in Cassie's apartment, jolting her from a light, restless doze. It was the hospital. "Miss Moreno? It's about Max. He's in distress. He collapsed. The ambulance is on its way." The rest of the night was a blur of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, and the terrible, rhythmic beeping of machines. Max was alive, but barely. His potassium levels were critical. His kidneys had shut down completely. "We need to get him on dialysis immediately," the ER doctor said, a woman with kind, tired eyes. "Yes, of course. That's what we—" The doctor was interrupted by an administrator with a clipboard. "Miss Moreno? We have a problem. Your insurance has lapsed. And this hospital is out of network for his emergency care. I can pay. I just need time. We need a deposit to continue non-essential treatment," the administrator said, his voice devoid of emotion, "or he'll have to be transferred to a county facility." "Transferring him will kill him," Cassie shouted. "You can't. I'm sorry. My hands are tied." Cassie looked at her brother, small and pale in the oversized bed, tubes running from his arms. She thought of the $5,000 she had returned. She thought of the $25,000 she owed. She had no choice. She had no money, no hope, no time. She pulled out her phone and made the only call she could. Her voice was dead, hollowed out by despair. "Ray, it's Cassie." A pause. "I told you." "I know, but I'm at the ER at St. Jude's. Max he's dying. They won't treat him. I need money. I need your boss." She could hear the smirk in his voice. "Knew you'd come around, baby. Knew you needed me. Just help him," she whispered, tears finally breaking free. "I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. Just make them help my brother. I'll be right there." She lied to the administrator, told them a private benefactor was covering the bill. An hour later, she was in a sterile waiting room, signing a stack of papers from Ray's gang, effectively signing an IOU for an unlimited amount, collateralized by her life. She didn't even read the interest rate. She just signed her name, over and over, as Ray watched, across the street. Nico got back into the car. "She did it," Nico said, his voice grim. "She's in the lobby with Ray right now. She signed papers with Delaney's crew. She's collateral. Boss, she used her brother's sickness to get a marker." Luca's jaw tightened. He had just warned Ray away. And now, the man had used her desperation to hook her deeper than ever, tying her to Victor Delaney, a man Luca despised. "She took his debt," Luca said, the words flat. "To save the kid," Nico confirmed. "The hospital was going to turn them away." Luca was silent for a full minute, the rain streaking the tinted windows. He had tried to give her money, and her pride had refused it, so she sold herself to the gutter. He respected it, and it infuriated him. "Handle it, Nico." "Delaney." "The hospital," Luca commanded, his voice sharp. "Pay the bill, all of it, an anonymous donation, a clerical error. I don't care. Make that IOU she just signed worthless, at least the part that holds the hospital over her head. I want that bill zeroed out by morning." Nico nodded, already on his phone. "And Nico," Luca said, his eyes fixed on the hospital's emergency entrance. "Find out what it would cost to buy St. Jude's. It might be time we made a donation to their pediatric wing." The relief of seeing Max stable was a high-caffeine, low-sugar buzz that lasted only hours. The doctors were pleased. Max was sleeping, and Cassie was left to navigate the administrative battlefield. She sat in the vinyl chair outside the billing department, her hands clammy, the IOU she'd signed for Ray's people feeling like a fresh, septic wound. She was here to set up a payment plan she couldn't afford, to beg, to plead, to do whatever it took to keep Max's care from being interrupted again. When her name was called, she walked into the small, beige cubicle and faced the administrator, the same man from the emergency room. "Miss Moreno," he said, tapping at his computer, his voice flat. "We were just finalizing the discharge paperwork. I know, Cassie said, her voice dry. I need to set up a payment plan for the emergency services. I signed the forms, the IOU. The man frowned, tapping again. That won't be necessary. Cassie's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Is he being transferred? No. He's cleared for discharge tomorrow. The bill. He tapped one last time and swiveled the monitor. The account balance is 0. Cassie stared at the screen, a long string of charges. The ambulance, the ER stabilization, the overnight monitoring, all followed by a single line, payment in full, anonymous benefactor. Anonymous? She whispered. That can't be right. I signed paperwork with a lender. They were supposed to cover this. The administrator shrugged. A tiny, bureaucratic movement. We received a wire transfer this morning for the full amount. As far as St. Jude's is concerned, the account is settled. It was all handled. Handled. The word hung in the sterile air, heavy with menace. This was not a miracle. This was a transaction she hadn't approved. Who? She demanded, leaning forward. You have to tell me who paid it. I can't accept. Miss Moreno. We are a hospital, not a bank. We do not investigate our payments. We just process them. He handed her a discharge summary. Have a good day. She walked out of the hospital into the gray Brooklyn afternoon, the panic colder than the wind. It was Ray. It had to be. He had paid the bill, solidifying her debt to him, to his boss. The IOU she signed hadn't just been for a loan, it was for her life. The $25,000 from her father was gone, absorbed into this new, larger, nameless debt. Her phone buzzed. A new text from Ray. See? We take care of family. My boss is happy you're cooperating. He's watching out for you now. Don't be late on the first payment. He's watching out for you. The words made her skin crawl. She walked home, and for the first time, she felt exposed. Every man on a corner, every car that slowed, every shadow in an alleyway seemed to be part of his network. She was a fly in a web, and she had just watched the spider pay her medical bills. The paranoia was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. She made it to the diner for her evening shift. Her nerves stripped raw. She was jumpy, spilling coffee, dropping a fork. Marge watched her with concerned eyes, but Cassie waved her off. She was too volatile to be touched, too terrified to be consoled. And then, at 7 o'clock, he walked in. Luca Moretti. He slid into his usual booth, the dark wool of his suit seeming to drink the diner's weak light. He looked at her, his gaze steady, unblinking. And in that moment, Cassie's fear, her paranoia, and her helpless rage found a target. He was one of them. Not Ray's crew, but the same world. The suit, the silence, the watching. He was just like the men who were suddenly watching out for her. He was a customer, yes, but his presence felt like an invasion. He had seen Ray grab her. He had seen her break. He had watched her, and he had done nothing. She grabbed the coffee pot, her knuckles white, and marched to his table. What do you want? She snapped. His eyes flicked up, registering her tone. They were dark, unreadable, and for the first time, she wasn't unnerved by them. She was furious. Coffee, he said, his voice a low rumble. Black. Is that all? She said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. Or are you here for the freak show? Come to watch the tired waitress get pushed around some more? Is that your entertainment? She didn't pour the coffee. She slammed the pot down on the table, a splash of black liquid hitting the saucer. Luca didn't flinch. He just watched her. His head tilted slightly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He looked patient. You like watching people suffer, she pushed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The diner noise faded around them. You like watching me? He held her gaze for a long moment. He should have been angry. He should have told her to get lost, to get his coffee. He should have acted like any other customer. He didn't. Yes, he said, so softly she almost missed it. The answer stunned her into silence. He leaned forward, just an inch. I apologize, he said. And the words were so unexpected, so foreign in that setting, that they knocked the breath out of her. I'm not familiar. My attention has made you uncomfortable. It was not my intention. Cassie stood there, Her entire defense system short-circuiting. He had apologized. He hadn't called her crazy. He hadn't told her to get back to work. He had apologized for watching her. She fumbled for a response. I have to... She grabbed the pot and fled to the kitchen, her heart hammering for an entirely different reason. The rest of the shift was a blur. She voided booth 4. She focused on the grill, the pass, the clock. When 10 o'clock finally came, she bolted, grabbing her jacket and pushing out the front door, not even waiting to cash out her tips. The sky opened up. It wasn't a drizzle, it was a deluge. A cold, heavy, October rain that soaked her thin jacket in seconds. The bus stop was half a block away, its plexiglass awning rattling under the assault. She ran for it, but it was useless. The wind drove the rain sideways, plastering her hair to her face, chilling her to the bone. She stood shivering, watching the traffic hiss by. Her bus, at least 10 minutes away, a black town car, long and sleek and utterly out of place, pulled up to the curb in front of her. The tinted rear window glided down with a whisper. It was Luca Moretti. "Get in, Cassie." Wasn't a request. "No, thank you," she stammered, hugging herself. "My bus is..." "It's 20 minutes late. I checked the schedule." He watched her shiver. "Don't be stubborn. You'll catch pneumonia." She hesitated. She was cold. Max was waiting up for her. And this man... He had apologized. He wasn't Ray. He was something else. Something dangerous. But he wasn't Ray. She pulled the heavy door open and slid in. The world outside disappeared. The hammering rain was reduced to a distant, muffled drum. The air inside was warm, dry, and smelled of rich leather and something clean and masculine. It was silent, the silence of money. She sat on the edge of the plush leather seat, dripping onto his immaculate floor mats. "Where to?" he asked. She gave him the address, her voice small. He didn't move. He was just looking at her, his dark eyes intense in the shadows of the car. "Why were you so angry?" he asked. I was having a bad night." "It was more than that," he said. "You looked at me like I was the one who hurt you." Cassie looked down at her hands, at the ragged cuticles, the chapped skin. "People like you," she whispered. "You don't just watch. There's always a reason. There's always a price. So you assume the worst." "I assume the truth," she retorted, looking up, finding a spark of her earlier fire. "In my world, nothing is free, not even a look, and especially not help." He seemed to consider this. "So you'd rather drown in the rain than accept a ride? You'd rather be harassed by men like the one in the diner than accept protection?" "Protection," she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "That's what he said. We're watching out for you. Protection is just a prettier word for a cage. It's a debt. I have enough of those." His expression darkened. "The hospital bill." Her blood ran cold. "How did you..." "It was you. It was handled," he said, echoing the administrator. "Why?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why would you do that? To own me? To make me one of your... whatever I am? You think you can just buy me?" "I think your brother needed a doctor," he said, his voice sharp and sudden, cutting through her panic. "I think you were desperate, and I think you made a bad deal with worse men. I intercepted it. That's all." She stared at him, her mind racing. He had paid. Not Ray. Him. The unreadable man in the back booth. "I can't pay you back," she said, her voice breaking. "I know. I don't want your help," she cried, the tears of exhaustion and confusion finally coming. "I don't want to owe you. I don't want to owe anyone. I never asked for love. I never asked for anything. I just want to be left alone." The words hung in the warm, quiet air. She was trembling. The confession ripped from her. Luca looked at her, and his face was no longer unreadable. It was sad. "Some people," he said, his voice rough, "don't get the luxury of being left alone. They get the world they're given, and they have to survive it. You don't have to like the help, Cassie. You just have to be smart enough to take it." He put the car in gear and pulled smoothly away from the curb. The ride was silent, but it was a different silence. It was heavy, charged. He drove the 6 blocks to her apartment. the rain a steady rhythm, the windshield wipers keeping time. He parked. She didn't move, her hand on the door handle. "Thank you for the ride," she whispered, not looking at him. "He'll be back," Lucas said. "Ray," she flinched. "The money I paid? That just clears the hospital. It doesn't clear your other arrangement." "I know," she said, her voice hard. "I'll handle it." "How?" She finally looked at him. "The way I handle everything. On my own." She got out of the car and ran into her building, not looking back. Luca watched her go, his hands tight on the steering wheel. He watched her light go on in the third-floor window. He sat there for a long time, the engine humming. He picked up his phone and dialed Nico. "She's more stubborn than I thought," Luca said. "They're always stubborn, boss, until they're not. This one's different. She'd rather sell her soul to the devil she knows than accept a lifeline from the one she doesn't. She's going to try and pay them. Delaney's crew? They'll eat her alive." "I know," Luca said. "So we're going to starve them first. Find out everything about Ray's operation, his suppliers, his accounts, his safe houses. I want to know where every dollar he's ever made is hidden. And then I want you to freeze it. Lock him out. I want him to feel the chill by morning. That'll get Delaney's attention," Nico warned. "Good," Luca said. "Let it." Cassie did not sleep. The encounter with Luca had shaken her, but the debt to Ray grounded her in a terrible reality. The hospital bill was gone, a miracle she couldn't process, but the IOU she had signed was still valid. It was a new debt, one to Ray's boss, Victor Delaney, and the first payment was due in 3 days. The next morning, she walked to the part of town she hated. She stood for a long time outside the pawn shop, the little gold locket in her hand. It had been her mother's. It was the last piece of her she had. She went inside. The shame was a physical taste, like ash in her mouth. She walked out 20 minutes later with $400 in her pocket and a hole in her heart. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was a start. It was her money. She was walking home, taking a shortcut through an alley to avoid the main street, when a figure stepped out from behind a dumpster. "I've been looking for you. Cassie." Ray. He looked terrible. His eyes were wild, his face pale and sweaty. This wasn't the smirking enforcer from the diner. This was a cornered animal. "I have a payment," Cassie said, holding out the envelope of pawned money. "It's not all of it, but it's—" He backhanded her. The force of the blow sent her staggering against the brick wall, her head cracking against the mortar. Her vision swam. $400, he screamed, grabbing the envelope and throwing the cash into the wet grime of the alley. "You think this is a joke? This is garbage. Ray, I got the money. My accounts." "And," he yelled, grabbing her by the jacket and slamming her back against the wall. "They're frozen. All of them. Someone's squeezing me. Someone's cutting me off. Was it you? Did you talk to your new boyfriend?" "What are you talking about?" she gasped, tasting blood. "I don't—" "The suit," he spat, his face inches from hers. "The guy from the diner. You think he's going to save you? You think you're safe now?" He laughed, a high-pitched, desperate sound. "You're not safe. Cassie, you're collateral." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You know, your brother. Max. He's on the 3rd floor, right? Second room on the left by the window? It would be a real shame if the power went out on your block. All those machines he needs. They all run on electricity, don't they?" Cassie stopped breathing. The blood drained from her face. This was a new line, a line that was never supposed to be crossed. You're lying," she whispered, but the terror was absolute. Ray smiled, a true, ugly smile. "Am I? Make the call, Cassie. Get your new man to unfreeze my accounts, or I swear to God, I will unplug that little boy myself." He shoved her, hard, and she crumpled to the ground. He kicked the remaining money at her feet and stalked out of the alley. Cassie stayed there, on her hands and knees in the filth, shaking so hard she thought her bones would break. He had threatened Max. He had threatened her son. Across the street, parked in a loading zone, Nico turned to the back seat. "You saw that?" Luca's face was a mask of cold fury. He had been having Cassie followed for her protection. He had watched the entire exchange through the alley's mouth. He had heard every word. "Follow him," Luca said, his voice a low, dangerous monotone. They tailed Ray for 3 blocks to a grimy bar on the waterfront. Ray stumbled inside. "Boss, what's the plan?" Nico asked. "He mentioned the boy." "I know. You want the crew?" "No." Luca opened his door. "Wait here." He walked, not into the bar, but into the dark, narrow service alley that ran behind it. He found a spot, deep in the shadows, and he waited. An hour passed. The bar's back door opened, and Ray stumbled out, reeking of whiskey, fumbling for his keys. He never saw Luca move. One moment Ray was fumbling. The next he was airborne, slammed against the brick wall. A hand was around his throat, cutting off his air, lifting him. Luca Moretti looked even colder in the dark. His eyes were black pits of ice. Mr. Moretti, I didn't—" Ray gasped, clawing at the hand. "You mentioned his name." Luca whispered. It was not a fight. It was a punishment. Luca was a controlled, brutal storm. He didn't use a weapon. He used his fists, a hard, driving blow to the solar plexus that folded Ray in half, a sharp, precise strike to the ribs that was met with a wet, cracking sound. Luca let him drop, then kicked him, rolling him over. Ray was gasping, trying to crawl. "No," Luca warned his crew, who had silently gathered at the alley's entrance, drawn by the call. "No killing, not yet." He hauled Ray up by his shirt, his knuckles bloody. "You were warned," Luca breathed, his voice raw. "You were told to stay away." The accounts," Ray wheezed. "The accounts are the least of your problems." Luca dragged the whimpering, broken man to the large, overflowing dumpster at the end of the alley. With a grunt of pure disgust, he lifted him and threw him inside, onto the piles of rotting garbage. Ray landed with a wet thud. Luca leaned over the edge, wiping his bloody hands on a handkerchief. "Your accounts are gone. Your boss, Delaney, will be hearing from me. But you, if you ever breathe in her direction again, if you even think the name Max, I will not stop my men. I will do it myself, and I will not stop." He dropped the handkerchief onto Ray's chest. "Consider this a message." Luca turned and walked out of the alley, his suit perfectly straight, leaving Ray to the rats in the dark. The silence was the first thing she noticed. For 2 days after Ray's threat in the alley, Cassie lived on a knife's edge, her phone a ticking bomb in her apron. Every buzz was a jolt of panic. Every text from an unknown number a new wave of nausea, but the texts never came. Ray, who'd been a constant suffocating presence, vanished. His calls, his threats, the low-level collectors who sometimes loitered by her building, all of it just stopped. It wasn't relief. It was dread. This kind of quiet wasn't peace. It was the intake of breath before a scream. It meant his bosses, Delaney's crew, were involved. It meant her small-time problem had just been escalated to the professionals. But a week passed, and then another. The quiet held. On a bright, cold Friday morning, Max came home. He was still weak, the pallor under his skin a constant reminder of his fragility. But he was home. He was out of the hospital, and for the first time in months, there was no active, immediate threat banging on their door. That night. Cassie sat in the dark living room long after Max had fallen asleep. She listened to the steady, comforting sound of his breathing from the next room. She felt her shoulders, which had been tensed up to her ears for a year, drop a single, blessed inch. She could breathe. It was a shallow breath, laced with skepticism, but it was hers. The relative peace made her sloppy. When Luca Moretti walked into the diner the next evening, she didn't feel the usual spike of alarm. She felt something else, something complicated. He didn't take his usual booth. He sat at the counter, in her section, forcing an interaction. It was a power move, but a quiet one. She approached him, a coffee pot in her hand. "You're in a new spot. A change of scenery," he said. His eyes were on her, not scanning the room. This, too, was new. "You look different." "I got some sleep," she said, pouring his coffee. "My brother's home." "That's good news." He said it simply, as if it were a fact. She found herself lingering, wiping down the clean counter in front of him. The calls stopped, from Ray, from anyone. He sipped his coffee. He won't be back. The finality in his voice was terrifying. What did you do? She whispered, glancing at Marge, who was busy at the register. I made it clear his business was finished. He looked up at her. You have enough to worry about. She should have walked away. She should have been afraid. But the man who had threatened her brother was gone, and the man who had made him go was sitting in front of her. The gratitude was a confusing, bitter thing, mixed with her fear of him. Why? She asked, her voice low. The hospital. Ray. Why? Why does anyone do anything? He countered. No, that's not an answer, she said, but surprising herself with her own boldness. People in my life, they only do things for a reason. Usually, it's money, or to own you. He set his cup down, his gaze unwavering. And you? Why are you drowning in debt that isn't yours? The question was so direct, so personal. It disarmed her. He had seen her at her lowest, had paid her bills, had scared off her demons. He had earned something. My father, she said, the words tasting like old ash. He was a gambler, not a good one. He loved the horses, the cards, the action. He loved it more than us. She stared at the stainless steel counter, seeing her father's face, always smiling, always hiding a lie. He was a good dad when he was winning, but he never won for long. When my mom got sick, he took the money we were saving for her treatment. He told us he was going to double it. He was going to save her. She stopped, her throat tight. Luca was silent, listening. He wasn't pitying her. He was just present. He lost it all, she continued, her voice flat. Every cent. My mom died 6 months later, in a county hospital. My dad, he died a year after that, but he was already gone. He left us with his debts, $25,000, and Ray was the man who came to collect. She finished, and the silence stretched. She'd never told anyone the full story. Not Marge, not Max. Your father was a weak man, Luca said. She flinched, expecting to feel anger, but she just felt tired. He was, and you are not. His eyes held hers. There was no pity, no sympathy. It was a statement of fact, and in that moment, she felt a connection to this dangerous, quiet man that was deeper than any she had ever felt. He saw the steel in her, not just the damage. The shift ended. She cashed out, her mind replaying the conversation. She walked out the front door, expecting the cold air to clear her head. His town car was at the curb. He was leaning against it, his suit a dark shadow in the streetlights. It's not raining, she said, stopping a few feet away. It's late, he replied, opening the passenger door. She got in. The silence in the car was different this time. It wasn't the heavy, charged silence of their last ride. It was comfortable. She was aware of him, of the size of him, the scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from him in the enclosed space. He drove her home. The streets of Brooklyn sliding by in a quiet blur. He pulled up to her curb, put the car in park, but neither of them moved. Cassie, he said, his voice rough. Thank you, she said, her hand on the door handle. She was about to bolt, to run back to her safe, worn-out world, but she didn't. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had seen her father's weakness and had not pitied her, but respected her. She made a choice. Max is asleep, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But would you like to come in? For a minute, I can make coffee. Real coffee, not diner sludge. His eyes searched hers in the dark, looking for the trap, for the motive. He found none. He just found her. He nodded and shut off the engine. Her apartment was tiny, but it was clean. A worn-out sofa, a small bookshelf overflowing with Max's school books, a threadbare rug. It was a home built on resilience, and it felt impossibly fragile. Luca seemed to fill the small space. He stood in her living room, his expensive suit looking alien, his shoulders a foot wider than her doorway. He looked out of place. But he was gentle. He moved carefully, his hands clasped behind his back, as if afraid to break something. This is it, she said, with a nervous, self-deprecating laugh. "It's a home," he said, his gaze landing on a framed photo of a smiling woman on the bookshelf. Her mother. "That was my mom," Cassie whispered. He nodded, then turned to her. She was in the kitchen, a tiny alcove off the main room, her hands fussing with the coffee maker. He was standing just a few feet away. The air was thick. The apartment was too small for this much tension. "You don't have to," he said. "What?" she asked, her back to him. "Make the coffee." She stopped, her hands frozen over the filter. She turned around. He hadn't moved, but he seemed closer. The space between them was electric, a live wire. She could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. He wasn't just a suit or a boss. He was a man. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her voice shaking. You paid my bills. You scared away the monster, and now you're in my kitchen. I don't know the rules here." "There are no rules," he said, taking one step. He was in the kitchen with her now, the space barely big enough for one. "There are always rules," she insisted, her back hitting the counter. "There's always a price." "What's yours?" "I don't know," he said, and she believed him. He seemed as lost as she was. He lifted his hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his fingers rough against her skin. It was a simple touch, but it sent a shockwave through her. She hadn't been touched with kindness in years. She leaned into his touch, a small, involuntary movement. Her eyes fluttered closed. It was all the permission he needed. His other hand came up, cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. He was just looking at her, his dark eyes searching hers, and then he leaned in. The kiss was hesitant. It was a question. His lips were firm, warm, and they just rested against hers. He was waiting. Cassie's heart was a trapped bird. She was afraid of him, of what he was, of what this meant. But underneath the fear was a desperate, aching loneliness, a need to feel wanted. She rose up on her toes, just a fraction, and pressed back. The change was instant. A low sound rumbled in his chest, and the hesitance vanished. The kiss deepened. His hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, tilting her head, his other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She wasn't small and fragile. She was solid, real, and he held her like he was starving. His mouth was not gentle, but it was not rough. It was consuming. He kissed her with a focused intensity that left her breathless. He kissed her like he had been thinking about it for weeks. In the back of that diner booth, Cassie felt herself melt. Her hands, which had been braced against his chest, crept up, her fingers gripping the lapels of his expensive suit. She kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her fear, her gratitude, her loneliness, her frustration into it. She let herself feel, just for a second, what it was like to be held by someone strong, to be protected. He moved them, never breaking the kiss, until her back was flat against the wall. He was all heat and muscle, a wall of controlled power. His mouth moved to her jaw, her neck, and she gasped, her head falling back, and that's when reality hit her. Oh, debt, payment. She froze. Her hands, which had been clinging to him, went flat against his chest. She pushed. "Stop." He stopped. Instantly. He pulled back, his breathing heavy, his eyes dark and dilated. He was still holding her, but the pressure was gone. "I can't," she whispered, her voice wrecked. She was trembling. "I can't." He searched her face, his expression tight. "I hurt you." "No," she said, almost a sob. "No, you didn't. I can't." She pushed against him again, and he let her go, stepping back, giving her space. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I can't pay you back for this," she whispered, staring at the floor. "I have no money. I have nothing. I can't owe you this." The silence was deafening. Luca scrubbed a hand over his face. He looked tired and more human than she had ever seen him. He took a step toward her, but stopped when she flinched. "Cassie," he said, and his voice was soft, rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "This isn't a debt. Everything is a debt. Not this." He looked at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with the kiss. "You don't owe me. I just want to be near you." He turned and walked out of her apartment, the door clicking softly shut behind him, leaving her alone, shaking, and more confused than ever. The next day, she got the call at work. She was in the middle of the lunch rush when her phone rang. It was Max. He wasn't talking. He was screaming. She ran. She ran the 10 blocks home, her lungs on fire, a single word looping in her head. No, no, no. She saw the door from the end of the hall. It was splintered, hanging open. The lock played a jagged hole in the wood. "Max!" she screamed, bursting into the apartment. It was a violation. They had been thorough. The sofa cushions were slashed, feathers drifting in the air. The small TV was shattered. Her bookshelf was overturned, the photo of her mother crushed underfoot. The kitchen, every plate, every cup, was broken on the floor. But the worst part was the message, spray painted on the wall in black. "We can touch anyone." "Max," she cried, panic tearing her throat. "In here." His voice was tiny. He was in his closet, huddled in the back, clutching his knees. He was physically fine. He was safe. But his eyes were wide with a terror she had never seen. He was 13, and he looked ancient. They just broke it, Cassie," he whispered, shaking. They never looked for me. They just broke everything." She called the police. She knew it was useless. 2 officers showed up 3 hours later. They walked through the wreckage, their faces bored. "You know anybody who'd want to do this, miss?" one of them asked, chewing gum. "His name is Ray," she said, her voice dead. "He works for Victor Delaney." The officers shared a look. The gum chewer sighed, closing his notebook. "Victor Delaney. Right. Look, miss," the other one said, his voice laced with false pity. "You get mixed up with people like that, things like this. They happen. It's vandalism. We'll file a report." "You're not going to do anything?" she cried. "We'll tell you to get a new lock," the officer said, heading for the door. "And maybe, don't drop names you shouldn't. Have a good night." They left. She was alone. Alone with the wreckage, with a terrified child, and with the absolute, chilling knowledge that the law was not on her side. She was sweeping up broken glass when he appeared. There was no knock. The door was broken. Luca Moretti simply materialized in the doorway, his large frame blocking the hall light. He took in the scene. The trashed apartment, the spray paint on the wall, the broken glass and feather-coated floor. His eyes moved over it all, his face a mask of granite. Then his gaze landed on Cassie, on her shaking hands, on the broom. The fury that rolled off him was a physical thing. It was cold, it was dark, and it was so potent it sucked the air from the room. "Where is the boy?" His voice was a low, dangerous monotone. "He's safe," Cassie whispered. "In his room, with the door locked. This was Delaney," he stated. "They did this because of you," she suddenly screamed, the terror and rage boiling over. She threw the broom. It clattered uselessly at his feet. "You poked the bear. You sent your message to Ray, and this is the one they sent back. This is your fault." He didn't flinch. He just watched her, his face grim. "Yes," he said. "It is." He stepped inside. "Pack a bag, both of you. My men are downstairs. I have an apartment. It's clean. It's protected. You'll be safe there." "No." He stopped. "No, no," she yelled, tears of frustration and terror streaming down her face. "I'm not going with you. If I go with you, I'm just a different kind of property. I'll be in your cage instead of his. At least here, I'm free." "This isn't freedom, Cassie," he said, his voice raw, gesturing at the destruction. "This is a war zone, and you just put your brother on the front line." The words hit her harder than Ray's fist, because they were true. "I won't be your captive," she whispered, her stubbornness the only thing she had left. "I am not trying to capture you," he said, his voice tight with a rage she realized wasn't directed at her, but at the situation, at Delaney, at himself. He stared at her for a long, hard minute, the immovable object and the unstoppable force. "You are a fool," he said, his voice flat. He turned and walked out. Cassie slid down the wall, her legs giving out. She sat in the wreckage, surrounded by the ruins of her life. That night, she couldn't sleep. She had cleaned. She had scrubbed the paint off the wall until her fingers were raw. She had nailed a piece of plywood over the broken door. She sat on the sofa, her mother's broken picture frame in her hands. Max was asleep in her bed, the lock on her door flimsy, but in his mind, a barrier. She was alone. She had no money, she had no protection, the police were useless. And she had just pushed away the only person who had offered any help. She had done it to protect herself, to protect her right to not owe him. But as she sat there in the dark, the cold seeping in through the broken door, she realized the truth. Her pride had not kept her safe. It had just guaranteed she would be alone when the real monsters came. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking, and for the first time since her mother died, she wept. She cried for her father's weakness, for her mother's absence, for her brother's stolen childhood, and for the terrifying, impossible, dangerous man she had just kissed. The dialysis clinic waiting room was its own special kind of hell. It was beige. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax, and the television was perpetually tuned to a game show with a screaming audience. Cassie sat, her leg bouncing, watching the clock. Max was in the chair, a book in his lap, but his eyes were on her. He could feel her fear. Ever since the break-in, her nerves were wire-stripped and exposed. She was so focused on the door to the treatment bay that she didn't see him enter the waiting room until he was standing in front of her. Luca Moretti. When he wasn't in his suit, he wore dark jeans and a gray quarter zip, looking less like a boss and more like a civilian. It was a disguise, and it made him more dangerous. "Cassie," he said, his voice low, urgent. "We need to talk." "No," she said, her voice tight, grabbing Max's hand. "We're busy." 5 minutes, he pressed, his eyes flicking to the other people in the room, a sleeping old man, a nurse at the desk. "Please, for him." He gestured to Max, and that was the mistake, the implication that she was failing, the pity, the reminder of her powerlessness. It all converged with the sleepless nights, the terror of the break-in, and the cold, indifferent faces of the police. "He's here," Luca said, "because of me. I know that. Let me fix it. Let me put you somewhere safe. Let me take care of this." He was begging, not for him, but for her. And it was the begging that broke her. All the air she'd been holding, all the fear she'd swallowed, came roaring out. "You!" she yelled. The word was a slap. The game show audio seemed to vanish. The nurse looked up. "You did this!" she screamed, scrambling to her feet, putting herself between him and Max. "You and your messages! You think this is a game? You think you can just break a man in an alley and there's no comeback? Look at us!" She was crying now. Hot, angry tears. "This is my life. This is my brother. This isn't your property to protect. You brought this to our door. You painted a target on us. Cassie, that's not—" "Leave us alone," she shrieked, and the sound was raw, ripped from her throat. "We don't want your help. We don't want your money. We don't want you. Just go." She was heaving, her chest aching. The entire room was staring. Max was pale, his eyes wide. Luca stood there, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes were shattered. He had come here to save her, and she had just crucified him in public. He looked at Max, then back at her. He gave a single, pained nod, and then he was gone. He got into the back of his town car, the door shutting with a heavy, final thud. Nico was in the driver's seat, not looking at him. "You heard that, I assume," Luca said, his voice flat. "The whole zip code heard it, boss," Nico said, his voice rough. "She's not wrong. You poked Delaney. Now he's poking back. He broke into her apartment. He threatened a child. And you put one of his enforcers in the hospital. Ray is Delaney's nephew. By the way, his sister's kid, the one he was supposed to be training. It's not just business anymore. Luca, it's family. And Delaney knows you're the one who froze his accounts." Nico turned, his face grim. He's making noise. He's complaining to the old men. He says you're stepping on his territory, interfering with his collections. He says you're obsessed with a civilian girl. It's making you look sloppy. It's making us look weak." Luca's jaw tightened. This was the part of the life he hated. The politics, the posturing, the rules that protected scum like Delaney. "He called her a collection," Luca said, his voice a low growl. "She's not property. She's not a debt." To him, she is. Luca stared out the window at the hospital. He had tried to play this quiet. He had tried to protect her from a distance, but Delaney had escalated. Now, so would he. He pulled out his phone and made a call, not to one of his captains, but to a number that rarely saw the light of day. He spoke in rapid, low Italian. "Donato, it's Luca." He listened for a moment. "Yes, I know it has been. I'm calling in the marker, the one from Philadelphia, your son." He listened again, his face hard. "I don't want a war. I want sanitation. Victor Delaney has an enforcer, a nephew named Ray. He's a liability. He's threatening children, drawing police attention. He's sloppy, and his uncle is protecting him." Luca paused, letting the implications sink in. "I want clearance. I want you to tell the other families to look the other way. I'm cutting out Delaney's side operations, the loan sharking, the drugs he's running through that neighborhood, all of it. I'm taking his legs out from under him, but I want your word that this stays with him. It does not escalate." A long pause. Luca closed his eyes. "See, I understand. The favor is cleared. Thank you." He hung up. "What did we just get?" Nico asked. "A green light," Luca said, his voice cold, "to dismantle every piece of Ray's world, and a warning. Delaney himself is protected by the old guard, for now. So we take his toys. We take his money. We take his nephew. We leave him with nothing but his title." The next day, Cassie walked into the Galaxy Diner for her shift, her head down, her heart heavy with the shame of her outburst. Marge met her at the door, her eyes red. "Marge, what's wrong?" "Oh, Cassie," Marge said, pulling her into a hug. "I'm so sorry, honey. I tried. I really did." "What? What are you—" "The owner," Marge whispered, pulling back. "He fired you." Cassie's blood ran cold. "He— What?" "2 men. They came in this morning." "Sharp suits. Not your style," she said, meaning not Luca's style. "They told Mr. Harris that your unwanted trouble was bad for business, that if you kept working here, they'd make sure no one else came in." Marge was crying. "He's a coward, Cassie. He caved. He said, 'You're done. Here.'" She shoved a wad of cash into Cassie's hand. "This is your last week's pay, and a little something from me. Don't you tell him." Cassie stood on the sidewalk, the familiar smell of frying onions wafting from the diner, a place that had been her one, stable rock, and now it was gone. She was unemployed. She had no income. Rent was due in a week. Max needed a refill on his medication. The spiral was fast. She sold her mother's locket. She sold her own winter coat. She sold Max's old video game console, lying to him that it was broken. The money was gone in 2 days. She walked the streets looking for help wanted signs. No one wanted to hire someone with no references and no availability. Someone who needed to be home by 3 for her brother. Finally, she found it. A handwritten sign taped to the back door of a grimy, black-painted bar called The Crow's Nest. Cleaner wanted, 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. Cash. It was the bottom of the barrel. It was a job for ghosts, for people who didn't exist in the daylight. She took it. The work was brutal. It was scrubbing floors sticky with spilled beer and God knows what else. It was cleaning toilets that hadn't been properly bleached in a decade. It was the smell of stale whiskey, vomit, and ammonia, a smell that clung to her skin. She would work from 2 until 7, walk home in the gray dawn, get Max ready for his bus, and then collapse into bed. She would sleep for 3 hours, wake up, meet Max's bus, make him dinner, and try to stay awake until it was time to go back to the bar. She was running on fumes. She was pale, her clothes hanging off her. The bones in her face stood out, her eyes 2 dark, bruised hollows. From a car parked in the shadows a block away from the crow's nest, Luca watched her emerge one morning. He had found out where she was working within an hour of her first shift. He watched her stumble on the curb, her exhaustion so profound she was weaving. "This is madness," Nico said from the driver's seat. "Boss, just grab her. She's killing herself." "And say what?" Luca's voice was raw. "I fired you so I could save you. I destroyed your life. Now let me give you a new one?" She'd spit in my face, and she'd be right. He was trapped. He was dismantling Delaney's empire, piece by piece, turning off his money, arresting his dealers, gutting his entire operation. But he couldn't stop the one thing he wanted to: Cassie's suffering. She had forbidden him from helping. And her pride, her stubborn, beautiful, infuriating pride, was a fortress he couldn't breach. "So we just watch?" Nico asked. "Oh." "We watch," Luca said, his knuckles white. "And we wait." He didn't have to wait long. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. Cassie had lost track. It was 4 a.m. She was mopping. The floor seemed to be swaying. The bucket of bleach water was fuzzy. She was so cold, but she was sweating. A high-pitched whine started in her ears, blocking out the sound of the jukebox the bartender had left on. "Gotta finish," she mumbled, leaning on the mop. The floor tilted violently. The last thing she saw was the dark, gritty wood rushing up to meet her. Then nothing. The first sensation was beeping, a steady, rhythmic beep. The second was the smell, antiseptic. No, she thought, her mind thick and foggy. Not again, not the hospital. A panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog. Max. She tried to sit up, but her body felt like it was filled with sand. A tube pulled at her arm. "Max," she gasped, her throat a desert. "He's safe." The voice. Low, calm, and so familiar it hurt. A hand, large and warm, settled on her shoulder, gently pushing her back down. She forced her eyes open. The light was dim. Luca. He was sitting by the bed. He wasn't in a suit. He was in a black Henley. The sleeves pushed up his forearms. He looked rumpled. His hair was a mess. His jaw was dark with stubble. He looked like he hadn't slept. "He's safe," he repeated. "He's at a friend's apartment, a woman, she's a nurse. She made him pancakes. He's watching a movie. He was scared, but he's okay." The relief was so sudden, so total, that it was a physical blow. The fortress she had built, the one made of pride and stubbornness and "I can handle it," it didn't just crack, it disintegrated. It was over. She couldn't fight anymore. A sob, dry and rattling, tore out of her chest. And then the tears came, hot, silent, and endless. She couldn't stop them. Luca just sat there, his hand on her shoulder, a solid, warm anchor in the storm. He didn't shush her. He didn't offer platitudes. He just let her break. When the first wave passed, she was left empty, her voice a raw whisper. How did you—" "The bartender called 911, he said. "I have a flag for your name at the city hospitals." He saw her flinch. "I had to, Cassie, I had to know you were— I had to." He looked at her, and the mask was gone. There was no boss. There was just a man who looked wrecked. The doctor said. He paused, his voice rough. "Exhaustion, malnutrition, severe dehydration. You were running on nothing." I lost my job," she whispered, as if he didn't know. The tears started again. "I had to, Max, I had to." "I know," he said. He moved, his chair scraping. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed, his weight making the mattress dip. He was so close. He reached out, his hand hesitating. He didn't touch her face. He touched the IV in her arm, his fingers, calloused and rough, were impossibly gentle as they traced the plastic tube. "This is my fault," he whispered. "No," she cried. It's mine. I was so stupid, so stubborn." "You were strong," he said, his voice fierce. "You were stronger than anyone I've ever known." He looked at her, his eyes dark and burning. "You carry too many scars, Cassie." He lifted her other hand, the one without the IV. He saw the new calluses from the mop. He saw the old, faint scar from the broken plate. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss into the palm. She trembled, a small, broken sound escaping her. He leaned in, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't have to be strong all the time." He kissed her. It was nothing like the first time. That kiss had been fire and question and a starved, desperate need. This was an answer. It was slow, and it was deep. It was a kiss of pure comfort, of reverence. He tasted her tears, the salt and the sorrow, and he just took them. She didn't pull away. She was too tired to fight, too broken to pretend. She gripped the front of his shirt, her knuckles white, holding on to him. He kissed her eyelids, her temple, the hollow of her cheek. He kissed the faint, yellowing bruise on her jaw from Ray's fist, and a low, angry sound rumbled in his chest. "I'm so tired," she whispered, her forehead resting against his. "I know," he said. He shifted, careful of her IV, and slid onto the bed, pulling her against his side, his arms wrapping around her. She was so light, he could feel every rib, every sharp angle. "Sleep," he murmured, his lips against her hair. "You'll be gone," she mumbled, her eyes already closing. "No," he said, his arms tightening. "I'm right here." She burrowed against his chest, her breathing finally evening out. She felt the steady, strong beat of his heart under her ear. It was the first time she had felt safe in... She couldn't remember how long. She fell asleep in his arms, the steady beep of the monitor, the only sound in the room. He held her for a long time, just breathing her in. He looked at her face, pale and exhausted even in sleep, and he felt a rage so pure and cold it terrified him, a rage for Delaney, for her father, for the world that had done this to her. He held her tighter, a silent promise. He whispered it into her hair, a vow. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." She woke up in the hospital to the smell of antiseptic, and she woke up in her new life to the smell of fresh paint. When the doctor discharged her, Luca was waiting. He was not in a Henley. He was in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his face composed, the mask back in place. But the hand he offered her was the same one she had clung to in the dark. She took it. He drove her. Not to her old apartment, but to a tall, pre-war building overlooking the park. It had a doorman in a maroon coat. It had polished brass elevators. It had silence. "I can't," she said, standing in the lobby, her small hospital discharge bag in her hand. "You can," he said, and led her inside. The apartment was on the 12th floor. It was bright, clean, and empty. 2 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, and a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. It's too much," she whispered. "It's safe," he countered. "The doorman is one of my men. The elevator requires a key. No one comes in." He walked her through the plan. It was not an offer. It was a strategy. "First," he said, "Max, he's staying with the nurse, Anna, for 1 more day. Tomorrow, he comes here. My company's medical plan will be adding him. Full coverage, his specialist at St. Jude's, his medications. It's done. You will never see a bill. Luca, Second," he continued, ignoring her protest, it's yours, for as long as you need it. The rent is handled. As a debt," she said, her voice small. "As a necessity," he corrected, his voice sharp. "And third, you can't work at that bar. You can't work at the diner. So I'm a prisoner." The old fear, the old pride was kicking. "You're an employee," he said. "I own a law firm. Downtown, property law. Utterly legitimate. It's my public face. They need a legal assistant. Filing, scheduling, organizing, 9 to 4. You're smart. You're meticulous. You can do it with your eyes closed. It pays a salary. A good one." He finally stopped, standing in the center of the empty room, and looked at her. "No illegal work. No underworld. Just a job, a safe place, and a doctor for your brother. That's the offer." She looked at him, at this impossible man who had thrown her world into chaos and was now offering to rebuild it, piece by piece. She saw the truth of her situation. She had no job, no money, and a sick child. Her stubbornness wasn't strength anymore. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. "It's temporary," she said, her voice shaking. "I'll take the job. I'll accept the apartment, but it's temporary. I'm going to pay you back. All of it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was small, quiet, and gone in an instant, but it was there. It was the smile of a man who knew how to wait, a man who was playing the long game. "Of course," Luca Moretti said. "Temporary." 2 months passed. For Luca, they were 2 months of tightening the screws. His world was dark and getting darker. "He's planning," Nico said, standing in the dim light of Luca's office, a heavy, oak-paneled room that smelled of old leather and power. "Let him plan," Luca said, staring at the financial reports. Delaney's operations were bleeding. "No, boss, you're not hearing me. He's not planning to fight for his territory. He's planning a hit." Luca looked up, his eyes cold. "He wouldn't dare." "He's desperate," Nico argued. "And he's smart. He knows he can't get to you. You're too protected." "So he's gonna hit her." The pen in Luca's hand snapped. Ink pooled on the desk. "He's going to use Cassie as bait," Nico said, his voice grim. "He knows she's your weakness. He's going to make a move on her. Or the kid. He's going to draw you out, make you angry, make you sloppy, and when you come for him, he'll be waiting." "Double the security," Luca said, his voice a low, lethal monotone. "I want eyes on her. I want eyes on the boy. I want eyes on the eyes. She's not to be left alone for 1 second. If Delaney so much as breathes in her zip code, I want to know." But for Cassie, those 2 months were a revelation. They were the first 2 months of her adult life that she had not lived in a state of grinding. Constant terror. The new apartment became a home. Max flourished, with his medical care consistent, with food in the refrigerator, with quiet. His health stabilized. Color returned to his face. He started a new school, and he was doing well. And Cassie thrived. She was good at the job. She was more than good. She was exceptional. The lawyers, who had at first been wary of the boss's new project, came to respect her. She was fast, intuitive, and organized. She started wearing her hair down. She bought a new coat, a dark blue wool that made her look professional. She even smiled, real, unguarded smiles that reached her eyes. She saw Luca. Not often. He was careful, giving her space to breathe, to settle. He would appear at her door once a week, under the guise of checking the security, holding a bag of groceries or a pizza for Max. They would talk, quietly, about her day, about Max's school. They never talked about the hospital. They never talked about the kiss. They never talked about the fear. They were two people living on opposite sides of a thick glass wall, a wall of unspoken things. The tension was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of their polite, careful friendship. Then came the invitation. The Moretti Foundation was hosting its annual charity gala for urban renewal. It was Luca's largest legitimate event. He asked her to come. "As my assistant, Nene," he said, his voice formal. I need someone I trust to be there." She panicked. She had nothing to wear. Nowhere to be in a room full of millionaires. The night of the event, a box arrived. Inside, on a bed of tissue paper, was a dress. It was not a flashy dress. It was simple, black and modest, long sleeves, a high neckline, and a cut so perfect it looked like it had been made for her. It was a dress of respect. When she walked into the ballroom, the sound of the string quartet seemed to falter. She wore the dress. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and she looked powerful. Luca was across the room, talking to a man who looked like a senator. He was in a tuxedo, the picture of wealth and control. He was laughing at something, a polite, empty laugh. And then he saw her. The laugh died, the conversation, the room, the noise, it all vanished. He just stared. It was the same look from the diner, the heavy, intense, analytical gaze. But this time, it wasn't solving a puzzle. It was admiration. He excused himself, his eyes never leaving her, and crossed the room. He didn't say she looked beautiful. He didn't have to. He just offered her his hand. "Cassie, The music changed, slowing to a waltz. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a question. He led her to the floor. His hand found the small of her back, his thumb resting on the fabric of the dress. Her hand, trembling slightly, went to his shoulder, and they danced. It was wordless. It was intimate. They were surrounded by hundreds of people, and they were completely alone. He held her firmly, guiding her, his body a solid, warm wall. She, who had spent her life fighting, just let go. She let him lead. The tension that had simmered between them for months was no longer a wall. It was a current, pulling them closer. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest, smell the clean, sharp scent of his cologne. "You're shaking," he murmured, his lips near her ear. "This is a lot," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the knot of his bow tie. "I don't belong here." He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His dark eyes were burning. "You belong exactly where I am." The song ended. They didn't move. The world rushed back in, the sound of chatter and clinking glasses, but they just stood there, caught in a moment that was more real than anything else in the room. The bubble burst. The gala was winding down. Luca was walking her to the car, his hand possessively on her back. It was the highest she had ever felt, the safest. They drove home in a comfortable silence, the unspoken intimacy of the dance filling the car. Luca walked her up, through the quiet, secure lobby. The doorman, his man, nodded. At her apartment door, she turned, fumbling for her key. "Cassie," he said. She looked up. He was watching her with an intensity that made her heart pound. "Thank you, Luca, for the dress, for tonight. You," he started, his hand coming up to her cheek. His phone rang, a short, violent buzz. He ignored it. He was looking at her mouth. It rang again. He swore, pulling it out. He looked at the caller ID. Nico. At this hour, on this night. His entire demeanor shifted. The warmth vanished. The boss was back. "What?" he answered, his voice pure ice. He listened. Cassie watched his face. It didn't change, but it emptied. All color, all life, all warmth drained from it, leaving a mask of cold, white fury. "Where?" he said. He listened again. "He's dark. Both men," Lucas said, his voice a dead monotone. He was looking at her, but he was seeing something else. "The apartment," he grabbed her, shoving her key into the lock, pushing the door open. "Max?" The apartment was silent, too silent. "Anna," Luca called, moving toward the back bedrooms. They found her, the nurse. She was in the kitchen, slumped over the table, a needle mark on her arm. Drugged, not dead, but gone. Cassie ran to Max's room. It was empty. The bed was made. The window was open, the cold night air billowing the curtains. On the pillow, where her brother's head should have been, was a single, folded piece of paper. A son for a nephew. The old shipyard. Come alone, or the boy pays the family debt. The paper fell from her fingers. She made a sound, a small, strangled noise of pure animal terror. Luca read the note. For a second, he was perfectly still. And then, he exploded. It was not a human sound. It was a roar, a raw, primal scream of rage that ripped from his chest. He grabbed the nightstand by Max's bed and threw it, the entire piece of furniture shattering against the wall. "Nico!" he bellowed into the phone. "He's gone! Delaney has the boy. I want every man. Do you hear me? Every man we have. I want them on the street in 5 minutes. I want Delaney's safe houses, his businesses, his whorehouses. I want them all burned to the ground. Find him now." Nico was yelling something on the other end, something about the trap, about coming alone. "I don't care," Luca roared, his eyes wild, his tuxedo jacket ripped from his body. "He wants me? He gets me. But you find that boy, you find him unharmed. Unharmed Nico, or I will burn this entire city to the ground." He threw the phone. It shattered against the wall, scattering in a dozen pieces. He was pacing, vibrating with a fury so potent it was terrifying. He was not the man who danced. He was not the man who paid bills. He was a killer. Cassie stood in the doorway, white, shaking, her black dress a mockery. What are you?" she whispered. He stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at her, and the mask was gone. There was no suit, no charity, no legal firm. There was only the truth. "I'm the man who just got your brother kidnapped," he growled. "No," she said, her voice rising, finding a strange, cold strength. "The charity, the company, that's the lie. The rage, the orders. This is the truth. Who are you? Luca?" He owed her. He owed her this. He dragged a hand through his hair, the mask of rage cracking, revealing the raw agony beneath. "My name is Luca Moretti. My grandfather, he ran this city. My father, and he ran the docks. This life. It wasn't supposed to be mine. I went to school. I was going to be a lawyer, a legitimate one." "What happened?" she asked, her voice a steel blade. "My older brother," he said, his voice flat and dead. "He was the heir. He was weak, like your father. He got into gambling. He got into drugs. And Victor Delany was his poison, his supplier. 5 years ago, my brother overdosed. Delany gave him the fatal dose. And the families, they called it an accident. They did nothing." He looked at her, his eyes black holes of old pain. "So I did. I came home. I took my father's seat. I took the power. I took the blood. I am everything you are afraid of. Cassie, I am a mafia boss. I am the man who protects his family." He looked at the empty room. "And I am the man who just failed to protect yours." The confession hung in the air, the truth, stark and ugly. Cassie walked toward him, her steps measured, her face unreadable. She slapped him. The sound was a gunshot in the silent room, a sharp, stinging crack. Her entire body, her entire soul was in that blow. Luca's head snapped to the side. A red handprint blossomed on his cheek. He stood there, taking it. He had expected it. He deserved it. He waited for her to scream, to run. She didn't. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her knuckles white, pulling him down to her level. She was trembling, but not with fear, with rage. "You listen to me," she whispered, her voice shaking with a fury that matched his own. "I don't care about your brother. I don't care about your father. I don't care about Victor Delany. I care about Max." He looked at her, stunned, seeing the steel that had drawn him to her in the diner, now forged into a weapon. "You bring him home," she spat, her eyes burning. You bring my brother home, because if you don't, if he dies, if that man hurts him—" She choked on a sob, but her grip didn't loosen. "I will never forgive you." The old shipyard warehouse smelled of rust, diesel, and the cold, briny water of the East River. It was a cavern of corrugated metal, a forgotten place fit for forgotten men. Luca Moretti walked into the center of the vast, open space, the yellow overhead lights casting long, sickly shadows. He was alone. The red handprint from Cassie's slap had faded from his skin, but he could still feel it. A branding of her pain and his failure. "Well, well," a voice echoed from the metal catwalks above. "The little boss, all alone. I'm touched." Victor Delany emerged from the shadows, flanked by 6 men. He was a small, unimpressive man, made smaller by the oversized, tacky suit he wore. He was a rat who had, for a moment, cornered a lion, and he had the bait. Across the space, tied to a steel support beam, was Max. He was small, pale, and trembling, his eyes wide with a terror that ripped Luca's soul. "He's just a boy, Victor," Luca said, his voice a calm, dangerous rumble. He held his hands out, open, away from his body. "He's not part of this. Your business is with me." "My business," Delany sneered, "was with my nephew, Ray, the one you crippled. My business was with my accounts, the ones you froze. You came into my house, Moretti, and you took— Now, I take— He's a child," Luca repeated, taking one step closer. "He's sick. This isn't justice. This is pathetic. It's leverage," Delany spat. "But you're right. I don't want the boy. I want you, a son for a nephew, a boss for a street punk. It's poetic." "Let him go," Luca said. "Let him walk out that door. And I'm yours. You have my word." Delany's laugh was a wet, ugly sound. "Your word? The word of a man who breaks the old codes? A man who bleeds for a civilian whore?" Luca's composure didn't crack, but his eyes went black. "All right, Moretti," Delany said, enjoying the moment. "You're so noble. Let's do it. Cut the kid loose." He nodded to one of his men, who moved toward Max with a knife. The man sawed through the ropes. Max stumbled, falling to his knees. "Go," Luca commanded, his voice soft, directed at the boy. "Run. To the door. Don't look back." Max scrambled, half crawling, half running. Luca kept his eyes on Delaney. And now... Delaney smiled, raising a hand. "You." He gave the signal. "Kill them both." Delaney's mistake was thinking Luca was noble. He was not noble. He was prepared. The man near Max aimed his gun not at Luca, but at the boy's back. Before he could fire, a gunshot, loud and sharp, echoed from the rafters. The man dropped. The warehouse exploded. It wasn't a firefight. It was an ambush. Nico and a dozen of Luca's men, hidden for an hour, materialized from the shadows, from shipping containers, from the catwalks. They had come not for a trade, but for a war. Delaney screamed, a sound of pure panic, as his men were cut down. Luca was already moving, diving behind a stack of rusted oil drums, his own weapon now in his hand. He wasn't firing at Delaney's men. He was firing a path to Max. He grabbed the boy, hauling him to his feet. "Get behind me! Stay down!" He shoved Max behind a massive rusted engine block, a fortress of iron. "Don't move!" The chaos was absolute. The air was full of smoke, the sound of shouting, and the sharp, percussive crack of gunfire. And into this hell. Cassie Moreno ran. She had lost her mind. That was the only explanation. After Luca had left, that cold fury in his eyes, she had sat in the apartment for 10 minutes, vibrating with terror. And then, the terror had turned to rage. She would not sit. She would not wait. She had run from the building, found one of the black sedans that was always parked a block away, and pounded on the window. The driver, a young man named Frankie, had his orders. "Watch the building." "He's at the shipyard," she had screamed at him. "Delaney's, I know he is. You take me there. You take me now, or I will walk, and I will tell your boss you let me." The panic in her eyes was more convincing than any threat. He had driven, his tires smoking. She had burst through a side door just as the main fight erupted. She was panicked, lost, screaming for her brother. "Max!" She saw him. He was huddled behind the engine block, just as Luca had left him. But the fight had shifted. 2 of Delaney's men were advancing on that position, trying to get a new angle. "Max!" she shrieked, sprinting across the open floor. She reached him, sliding on the oil-slick concrete, pulling him into her arms. "I'm here. I'm here. It's okay. I'm here." She was so focused on her brother she didn't see the danger until it was too late. Luca was pinned down, crouched behind a forklift, exchanging shots with the men who were advancing on her and Max. He was distracted, his focus split between the threat and the family he was protecting. A new figure emerged from the smoke, a lone gunman, circling, finding the perfect flanking position. He was on Luca's blind side. He raised his weapon for the clean, final shot. Cassie saw him. She saw Luca, unaware. She screamed, "Luca, behind you!" The warehouse was too loud. Her voice was lost. The man took aim. There was no time. There was no choice. A few feet away, one of Delaney's men lay dead. His handgun was on the concrete, glinting in the yellow light. Cassie, who had never held a gun, who had wept at the sight of one, scrambled. She left Max for 1 second, grabbed the heavy, cold steel. It was slick with something she refused to identify. She stood up, her arms shaking so violently she could barely aim. She held it with 2 hands, her eyes screwed shut, and pulled the trigger. The sound was a deafening explosion in her ears. The recoil was a physical blow, slamming her back against the engine block. The bullet went nowhere near the gunman. It hit a metal barrel 20 feet to his left, the ping of the ricochet sharp and clear, but it was enough. The gunman flinched, startled by the new threat. Turning his head toward the sound, it was all Luca needed. He turned, saw the man, saw Cassie on the ground, the gun smoking in her hand. He processed the entire, impossible scene in a heartbeat. He fired 2 precise shots. The gunman collapsed. The firefight was over almost as quickly as it began. Luca's men were disciplined, and Delaney's were cheap. Delaney himself was running, scrambling toward a back exit, a coward to the last. Luca emerged from the smoke, His tuxedo was ruined, his white shirt stained with dirt. He walked, not ran, a predator who knew the trap was shut. He cut Delaney off at the door. "No, Luca, please." The small man whimpered, fumbling for his own unused weapon. It was just business, a mistake." Luca slapped the gun from his hand, the sound echoing. He grabbed Delaney by the front of his suit, lifting him off his feet, and slammed him against the metal wall. "My brother," Luca growled, his voice a low vibration of agony. "He was weak, and you fed him poison. I didn't—" "And the boy," Luca continued, his voice dropping. "The boy was sick, and you used him." Luca's hands were on him. This was not a firefight. This was not business. This was judgment. It was close, brutal, and personal. Cassie, covering Max's eyes, heard a series of short, terrible, final sounds. When it was over, Luca stepped back, his chest heaving. He was splattered with blood. Delaney slid down the wall, a broken thing, and did not move. Cassie watched him. She watched this man, this killer, stand in the center of the carnage. He was a monster. He was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. And she was not afraid. She was not horrified. She was in awe. She was looking at a man who had ripped the world apart with his bare hands. Not for power, not for money, but for them. It was a fury born not of hate, but of a love so deep and primal it was its own force of nature. Nico ran up, his gun still raised. "Boss, sirens, police? 2 minutes out, we have to go." Luca's wild eyes finally found her. He saw her, covered in grime, holding her brother. He saw the gun on the floor beside her. He saw her looking at him, not in fear, but in understanding. He crossed the warehouse in 5 strides. He did not speak. He did not have to. He grabbed her arm, pulled her to her feet, and put his other hand on Max's shoulder. "It's over," he said. He led them through a dark tunnel, away from the sirens, away from the city, away from the life that had tried to kill them. They disappeared into the back of a black car and into the night. The safe house was a lie. It was a mansion, a modern fortress of glass and warm wood, hidden on a lake so still it looked like a black mirror. Days passed, or maybe just one long, endless day. Max was outside. He was fishing from the dock with Nico, who, it turned out, was surprisingly patient. He was laughing. It was a sound Cassie had not heard in years. Cassie was in the living room, sitting by a fireplace that was crackling with warmth. She was clean. She was wearing a soft gray sweater that belonged to Luca. She was safe. She was holding a file. Luca had walked in, placed it on the table, and walked away. He had been giving her space. He was dressed in jeans and a Henley, the blood and fury washed away, leaving only a quiet, tired man. She opened the file. It was her life, her entire, indebted, miserable life. Itemized, the $25,000 debt from her father, the one that started it all. Paid in full, stamped in red, the illegal IOU she had signed with Delaney's crew, nullified. Attached was a signed confession from a very broken Ray, liquidating his entire operation, the hospital bills, all of them, for every dialysis treatment, every emergency, a long list of zeros, and at the back, a bank statement, a new account, in her name, with a balance that made her head swim, and a second, a trust. For the education of Max Moreno, every chain, every link, he had broken them all. She looked up. He was standing by the massive window, watching his man teach her brother how to tie a knot. She stood. The papers scattered to the floor. She walked to him, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. She was angry, and she was so moved. She felt like her heart would burst. "You went behind my back," she whispered. Her voice was thick. He turned, his face etched with exhaustion. He looked at her, ready for the slap, for the anger. He knew he deserved it. Again. She finished. He held her gaze, his own full of a pain she now understood. "You said you didn't want love," he replied, his voice rough. "I didn't ask for thanks." "No," she said. "I didn't." She stepped closer, until she was inside his space, her small frame dwarfed by his. "I didn't ask for it. I didn't think I deserved it. I thought love was just another word for debt." He watched her, his heart, which he had thought was a dead thing, pounding in his chest. She took his hand, the one that had held a gun, the one that had killed Delaney, the one that had signed the checks. It was calloused, strong, and it was hers. She lifted it. She pressed his palm flat against her own chest, against her heart, forcing him to feel the steady, strong, living beat. "But I do now," she whispered. He looked down at his hand, pressed against her, and he felt her heart. He felt her life, and the last of his control, the iron guard he had held for an entire lifetime. Finally, completely, disintegrated. He pulled her to him, he kissed her. It was not the hesitant question in the kitchen. It was not the desperate comfort in the hospital. It was a kiss of absolute surrender, of a promise made and kept. It was without fear, without debt. It was two broken pieces, finally fitting together from the doorway. Max watched. He saw his sister, his warrior, his protector, finally being protected. He saw her, not tense and fighting, but soft and held. He saw the man who had walked through fire for them. And for the first time in his life, Max smiled and knew everything was going to be okay. He turned and left them alone. Luca held Cassie, his eyes closed, his forehead pressed to hers. He was no longer a boss. He was no longer a son. He was just a man, holding his entire world, and for the first time in his life, he let his guard down. He was, finally, home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are in the world, so please leave a comment and tell us where you're listening from. If you loved this story, be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. We'd be thrilled to hear your thoughts on Cassie and Luca's journey, so please share your comments in English. We read all of them. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next story.